This is the story of an empty ledger, an unsigned authorization form, and the chilling realization that a billion-dollar empire can be closed off without a single word being spoken. In the quiet confines of a royal financial briefing, the ultimate humiliation did not arrive as a screaming match or a leaked tabloid scandal, but as a cold, bureaucratic spreadsheet. What Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that wearing a crown does not mean you hold the keys to the vault. And carrying the title of Queen Consort does not come with an independent bank account. It is a story of staggering commercial desperation colliding with absolute institutional power. This video will unpack the secret financial power grab she attempted to execute, how the Prince of Wales quietly uncovered the paper trail, and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. We are going to examine the exact moment William weaponized the royal purse strings to execute a masterclass in institutional revenge. It is a forensic look at the devastating realization that beneath the velvet robes and the public deference, Camilla actually owns nothing, and her entire existence is currently being subsidized by the son of the woman she replaced. To understand the sheer magnitude of this institutional strike, we have to rebuild the illusion of absolute power that Camilla had so carefully constructed. For 30 years, she played the longest, most calculated game of survival in modern royal history. It was a staggering campaign of endurance and quiet manipulation. She survived the intense public hatred following the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. She slowly, methodically rehabilitated her image, utilizing a compliant press and leveraging Charles's unwavering, almost desperate devotion to wedge herself into the very center of the British monarchy. She orchestrated the slow institutional erasure of Diana's legacy, ensuring her own survival was inextricably linked to Charles's reign. The coronation was supposed to be the final untouchable victory. When she had that crown placed on her head, she believed the transformation from interloper to matriarch was complete. She operated under the absolute certainty that she had Charles completely controlled. And by extension, she believed she controlled the wealth of the institution itself. She felt financially invincible. The arrogance of that moment led to a staggering overreach. She began to blur the lines between the ancient royal bloodline and her own private family, assuming the infinite resources of the crown would serve her personal interests indefinitely. Before this administrative reckoning, palace insiders noticed subtle but undeniable shifts in her financial requests. Camilla began pushing for a permanent independent endowment. She sought to secure long-term leases on highly valuable royal properties in her own name, and she attempted to quietly integrate her non-royal children into the periphery of the royal payroll by requesting palace-funded security and logistical support for their private events. What appeared to be a mother's natural desire to secure her family's comfort was actually a deeply strategic move to permanently embed her bloodline into the highest tiers of British aristocratic privilege. She was attempting to bypass the traditional grace and favour system which relies on the goodwill of the monarch, to establish a standalone financial fortress that could never be dismantled. She fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the power she was wielding. She thought she had conquered the system because she shared a bed with the king. She did not realize the system is highly codified, ruthlessly protective of its assets, and ultimately governed by a financial architecture that she has absolutely no control over. Then came the transition of power that she had entirely underestimated. When Charles ascended to the throne, William became the Prince of Wales and inherited the Duchy of Cornwall. This was not merely a change in title or a ceremonial promotion, it was a massive, immediate transfer of actual tangible power. William was suddenly handed control of a sovereign estate worth well over $1 billion. This estate encompasses vast swaths of land, agricultural properties, commercial real estate, and most importantly, it acts as the primary financial engine that funds the private lives of the royal family. William did not just become wealthy, he became the undisputed landlord of the royal family, the ultimate gatekeeper of the private funds. Days later, the audits began. William is analytical, highly protective of his wife Catherine, and fiercely devoted to the legacy of his mother. He does not operate with the emotional volatility of his younger brother. He operates with forensic precision. As he and his financial team reviewed the ledgers, the budget allocations, and the pending requisition forms from Camilla's office, the paper trail of her commercial desperation became glaringly obvious. The subtle attempt to siphon duchy funds to support her private family and secure independent properties was entirely unauthorized by the new financial order. William did not confront her, he did not issue a public statement or wage a media war. That is the behavior of the powerless. The powerful do not need to speak. They simply freeze the accounts. What happened next was a masterclass in cold. Institutional retaliation, it started with the rejection of the property leases. When Camilla's team expected the standard immediate approval for a long-term property transfer, they were met with a chilling bureaucratic reality. The paperwork was silently returned, stamped denied. The requests for standalone security funding for her children were permanently archived without action. The invisible shield of absolute royal financial protection was quietly and systematically revoked. Her budget was not slashed in a way that would create a headline. Instead, her access to discretionary duchy funds was fundamentally downgraded. She was relegated to a strict, highly monitored operational allowance. Stripped of the ability to direct funds toward her private interests, that detail matters immensely. In the highly coded world of the British aristocracy, having your financial requests denied by a palace accountant is not a budgetary adjustment, it is an execution. It is a very clear, deeply humiliating message that your proximity to power has been severed. Not because the king is angry, but because the king no longer signs the checks. The moral outrage behind William's maneuver was palpable. This was not just about balancing a spreadsheet. This was about drawing a permanent line in the sand to protect Catherine, the true future queen, and to defend the sacredness of the institution from what he perceived as a staggering exploitation. William was ensuring that the people who had mocked his mother, the people who had coasted on his father's blind spots, would not be allowed to leech off the legacy he is destined to inherit. He used the system to dismantle her empire without raising his voice. He weaponized restraint. By tightening the purse strings of the duchy and enforcing strict compliance with financial protocol, William exposed the devastating contrast between Camilla's public image as a wealthy queen and her private reality as an individual with zero ancestral claim to the Windsor fortune. Behind closed doors, the realization hit Camilla with the force of a freight train. She arrived at her private desk expecting the deference of a queen, only to find that the very ground she walked on the staff who served her and the budget that funded her lifestyle were all entirely dependent on the goodwill of her stepson who has never forgotten the past. The illusion shattered. She realized that her title was just a word. She has no ancestral claim to the properties. She controls no independent wealth within the firm. Her entire existence within those palace walls is entirely reliant on one man. And so, facing the sudden and terrifying reality of her own commercial desperation, she did the only thing she could do. She turned to King Charles. She demanded that he intervene. She expected him to overrule William to force the duchy to release the funds and to put his heir in his place. But as she stood in the king's private study, demanding the unwavering financial defense she had relied on for 3 decades, the trap finally snapped shut. She expected the king to summon the Chancellor of the Duchy of Cornwall. She expected him to demand that William immediately release the funding, approve the property transfers, and restore her family's logistical support. She had spent decades managing Charles's emotions, convinced that his guilt over the past and his reliance on her in the present would always translate into absolute compliance. She stood in his study presenting the rejected financial requests, waiting for the righteous anger of a monarch defending his wife. Instead, she was met with an agonizing hollow silence. King Charles did not reach for the telephone. He did not summon the Prince of Wales for a reprimand. For a man who has spent his entire life waiting for the throne, the reality of sovereign wealth is undeniable. He knows that the Duchy of Cornwall operates independently of the crown, and he knows that William's authority over it is absolute. But more deeply, Charles recognizes that he cannot afford a financial civil war with an heir who holds the absolute loyalty of the public. He looked at the paperwork and he chose the institution over his wife's private ambition. The silence in that room was the quiet, devastating confirmation that the king would not bankrupt his relationship with his son to fund Camilla's illusion of independence. This brings us to the profound reality of Camilla's commercial desperation. To the outside world, she is a queen draped in diamonds, riding in gilded carriages, surrounded by the unfathomable wealth of the British monarchy. But the devastating contrast of Schadenfreude lies in the actual accounting. Camilla is a billionaire in public perception, but legally and functionally, she owns absolutely nothing of consequence. She has no ancestral estate to retreat to. She has no sovereign grant of her own. Even the homes she considers hers, like Highgrove or Clarence House, belong to the crown or the duchy. She is a life tenant entirely dependent on the grace and favour of the reigning monarch. William's financial audit was not a petty act of revenge. It was a precise, calculated drawing of boundaries. By freezing her out of the duchy's discretionary funds, William forced her to look at the terrifying logistical cliff that awaits her. If she outlives King Charles, she will not inherit the crown estates. She will be entirely reliant on William to grant her a stipend, to assign her a residence, and to decide the level of security she requires. The woman who spent 30 years maneuvering to capture the throne suddenly realized that the throne does not come with a pension plan. Her entire future rests in the hands of a man who watched her dismantle his mother's life. We are already seeing the physical manifestation of this new financial order. Look closely at the subtle administrative shifts and visual cues emerging from the palace. The extravagant private parties, the subtle elevation of her children, and the sprawling use of royal resources have quietly ground to a halt. In their place is a newly disciplined, highly centralised royal machine focused entirely on the Prince and Princess of Wales. William is drawing an impenetrable financial fortress around Catherine for years. Catherine has demonstrated uncomplaining sacrifice, enduring public scrutiny and internal palace politics with absolute stoicism. William is ensuring that his wife will never have to compete for resources, respect, or institutional priority. The wealth of the duchy is being deployed to secure the legacy of the next generation, completely bypassing the temporary custodian who currently wears the consort's crown. Catherine's institutional security is absolute, backed by the billion-dollar engine of the duchy, while Camilla's status remains entirely conditional. At the same time, this is the silent, devastating restoration of Diana's legacy. Camilla spent 3 decades trying to erase the memory of the Princess of Wales, positioning herself as the ultimate victor. But by stepping into the absolute financial power of his birthright, William executed a masterclass in silent retribution. He did not need to shout. He did not need to leak stories to the press. He avenged his mother simply by holding the checkbook and rigidly enforcing the rules. He ensured that the bloodline of Diana remains the supreme, unchallenged financial and institutional force within the British monarchy. Camilla will continue to smile for the cameras. She will still wear the heavy robes and attend the state banquets. The illusion of royal unity must be maintained for the public. But behind the heavy oak doors, the reality is entirely different. She is navigating a palace where her financial requests are routed through clerks who answer only to William. She is living with the daily suffocating knowledge that her empire is a mirage. She won the long game to become queen, only to discover that the title was merely an unpaid internship in a kingdom owned by her greatest rival. If you found this forensic analysis of royal institutional power insightful, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. We will continue to document the silent shifts and hidden realities of the modern monarchy.